You mentioned that you're in and out of hospitals. Does that mean that lupus kind of comes in waves? Because I know lupus is an autoimmune disease, but and so I've heard commonalities between lupus and MS. And so, do you go through exacerbations similar to that of MS?
Yes, lupus never goes away, but you can have times of quiescence or what we call remission, where the disease never leaves your body, but there's no symptoms that are presently there.
Yeah.
Or your labs look stable. They might say you're in remission because your inflammatory markers are low, or the medication is doing what it needs to do, but it never goes away. So lupus, as we know, is an autoimmune illness. So our body makes these autoantibodies that attack our healthy cells by mistake. And with systemic lupus, that can happen pretty much anywhere there's connective tissue. And that inflammation can cause tissue damage, and that tissue damage can cause organ failure. And at its worst, that organ failure can cause death. So it's really just kind of putting out a fire here, and then putting out a fire here, and putting out a fire here. Is it affecting my blood, or is it affecting my joints? Is it causing inflammation in my kidney? So it's just this constant management.
Yeah, and you touched on a good point in just explaining what autoimmune is for people who may not know. And it's just like an attack on the cells in your own body. And so you also touched on an interesting point with it's like inflammation in connective tissue. And for those that don't know, our body's made of connective tissue. I mean, that's what we're entirely made of, essentially. And so when you have these exacerbations, it can affect multiple parts of the body. So if she starts explaining like, okay, this is going to affect the blood vessels, or this is affecting like my joints, that's why we're not dealing with just like one organ system here, where like a meniscus tears with your knee, you're dealing with many different areas. And I can see how that would be so problematic and be like, did you have a difficult time figuring out whether it was like lupus, or if like maybe your knee just hurts for something else?
Yeah. The pediatrician was baffled at first. They thought that I was growing. I was 11 years old, that I was growing pains. And then they thought it was a tracking problem in my knees. And that's kind of, that combination is what sent me to physical therapy in the first place.
Right.
And with lupus, there's not one single blood test that shows, bam, you have lupus. There are multiple tests. And kind of a lot of it comes down to a process of elimination. And it's saying it's not a tracking problem. It's not growing pains. It's not this, it's not that, it's not that. And so they have to go through this protocol. And the American College of Rheumatology has 11-point criteria for diagnosis. And you have to have, I believe, 4 of the 11 to quantify that.
And how long does it typically take for someone to first start showing symptoms to the time of diagnosis? Because it seemed like, I don't know how long it took you for your first initial diagnosis, but I can see like getting this runaround of like confusion of trying to figure out what's actually going on. So how long did it take you to figure out to actually getting an answer from the first time you experienced symptoms?
Well, I can tell you on average, it takes lupus patients 6 years to get diagnosed. And that is really a scary statistic because of the way lupus can travel and the way that it can affect multiple vital organ systems. So a lot of times, by the time someone is appropriately and accurately diagnosed, there's already organ involvement, particularly in communities of color. Now, for me, when I told you I was first diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and they kept saying, you have an autoimmune connective tissue disorder. You have an autoimmune connective tissue disorder. But there was hesitancy to diagnose an 11-year-old with systemic lupus over 30 years ago. I didn't know anyone who had lupus that was with me in Children's Hospital until later on, like 3 or 4 years later. So it was, we don't want to say the word because they knew what that word meant 30 years ago.
Right.
There was not a lot of treatments then, and there's still not a lot of treatments now.